Woo, finally. All right. I'm so sorry that it took so long to finally go online. Quite some technical difficulties today. Nevertheless, hello students, hello teachers. Welcome to the first online reading with Tom Franklin, author of the best-selling novel Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. My name is Sophia Kummler and I work for the d.a.i. Tübingen, and I will make sure that hopefully this live stream will continue without any more technical difficulties. Today's event is hosted by the 4 German-American institutes in Baden-Württemberg, namely the d.a.i. Heidelberg, the Karl Schurzhaus Freiburg, the DAZ Stuttgart, and the d.a.i. Tübingen. And if someone has not heard of us yet, the d.a.i.s are independent cultural and educational institutions that have made it their mission to provide information about the USA and German-American relations. For this purpose, each institute organizes various events which contributes to a better understanding of the ideals, values, and culture of both countries. In addition, I would like to briefly draw your attention to the various programs designed for you, teachers and students. All 4 institutes have an English-speaking library as well as e-library, offer multiple language courses or summer camps designed for students, as well as teacher trainings, and they have individual school projects such as Rent an American or America Explained. Lastly, I would like to point out the d.a.i. Tübingen's youth trip to San Diego this summer for students between 15 and 19 years old. Check out our websites. You can find all the important links below in the info box and social media to see what's offered near you. And now to today's event. I'm very happy that Tom Franklin agreed to do a second online reading tour, but we do hope to bring him to Germany in person next year again, because Tom Franklin and Crooked Letter will stay Abitur Thema the next 2 years. If you do have any questions for Tom Franklin, please feel free to write them in the YouTube chat and we will try to answer them later. But please also note, if you do spam the chat, I might need to shut it off, because then our moderation simply cannot keep track of all the questions. This would be, it would be just a bummer. So please, don't spam as much in our YouTube chat. And now, it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to today's 2 main speakers. Firstly, of course, our guest of honor, so to say, Tom Franklin. And secondly, we had a slight change in moderation, and I'm so happy to introduce Ms. Inge Straß, Department Head of the Seminar für Ausbildung und Fortbildung der Lehrkräfte Tübingen for English, and a teacher at the Wildermuth Gymnasium in Tübingen, to which I hand it over now. Thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody here in Germany, and good morning to Tom again, for whom it is very early, I think sometime after 7 o'clock now. Okay, as you heard, my name is Inge Straß and I teach English at a gymnasium here in Tübingen, and also I'm a teacher trainer at the seminar. And I have the great pleasure to guide you through today's event. We will hear Tom Franklin, who has joined us from his home in Oxford, Mississippi. He's actually sitting in his office right now. Although for him it is very early, as you heard. He will talk to us about his novel, Crooked Letter, and also answer questions from the audience. Some questions have already been submitted by 4 different courses, one in Karlsruhe, one in Nuremberg, another one in Böblingen, and finally one from Stuttgart. But as you heard, each of you out there will have the opportunity to join in and post your questions on YouTube, but please take that notice seriously, not to spam the chat, so that we can process your questions. Okay, first let me say a few words about our renowned guest, Tom Franklin, and set the stage for his reading, or rather his talk. I take it that almost everyone listening has read and studied the novel Crooked Letter for the upcoming Abitur. And in doing so has also found out a little bit about the author. So I won't say too much about him, but he was born and raised and educated in a small town in the US South. He's a crime writer, but not only a crime writer, he's also written short stories, and he's co-written a book with his wife, Beth and Fennelly, the novel The Tilted World. And both Tom and his wife have been praised as being the king and queen of contemporary Southern literature. So he's known as a regional writer covering the US South. He's also won prizes, even for his first published book, which is a collection of short stories. He won the Edgar Award for Best Mystery Short Story for the title story Poachers. And Crooked Letter is a New York Times bestseller. It also won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. It received the Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction, the RT Reviewer's Choice Award for Best Contemporary Mystery, and then perhaps most prestigiously, the UK Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger Award. I just love that title, the Gold Dagger Award. Now, presently, he is an associate professor of fiction writing at the University of Mississippi, where he teaches creative writing, and you can see him sitting in his office. But it's not this list of books and prizes that will make today's event memorable for every one of us, but the way we can relate to Tom's work and his life. Maybe we find things which we share or questions that bewilder us. For me, the thing we share is growing up in a small place, in a small village where everybody knows everybody else and where you have this strong sense of belonging if you fit in. But if you don't fit in, life can be very harsh and difficult for you if you're the outsider or the outcast or even the weirdo. So I feel we have something in common there. Yet in my case, the small village was in Bavaria. It had a very homogeneous society, and the few people who sort of did differ from the rest were well respected for it. They were the pastor and the doctor and the teacher, and being from Bavaria, where every second village had its own brewery at the time, the brewer was the fourth person. In Tom's village in southern Alabama, the setup of the society wasn't like mine. It was half white, half black. So possibly it was quite different to grow up there, and I find it challenging to relate to that kind of thing. But luckily, there are books like Crooked Letter, which portray small town life to help me imagine what it has been like. Still, there is this cultural gap. And sometimes when reading books, we become aware of the cultural gap. And at other times we don't. And those other times where we lack awareness of such gaps may lead to misunderstandings or misjudgments of characters and so on. So becoming aware of such cultural differences and bridging the gaps in our understanding is the aim of an event like today's event, like this reading here. So let's find similarities, become aware of the cultural differences, and perhaps even bridge those gaps. And with those words, I'd like to hand over to Tom, who is very happy to do this thing as a complete Q&A without a reading in advance. So I'd like to link to what I've just said and ask the first question: what was it actually like to grow up in the deep US South?
Thank you, Inge, and thanks, Sophia. I want to first say that we've had a lot of technical difficulties this morning. When we first started, my computer just was not working. I had it all ready. I did a test yesterday, but somehow today it's not working. So I'm on my phone now, but my phone is running out of battery as we speak. The battery is getting less and less. So shortly, my wife is going to pop into my office here and bring me the charger that I need. So in a moment, I'll just pause and hook up my charger. And if for some reason my phone dies before she gets here, I'll be back as quickly as I can. Okay. And again, I apologize for all the technical problems this morning. But I was telling Inge and Sophia, I think that with COVID and now the advent of Zoom being so prevalent in our lives, we've all become a lot more patient with technology and with each other. So I thank you in advance for your patience for any snafus or technical glitches that we may have. And I'll do my best to get us through those. Well, it's a great question that Inge asked about growing up in the American South. And what's funny is wherever you grow up, that becomes your idea of the world. And you only realize as you get older that there's a different, much larger world out there. And so my world in Clark County, Alabama, growing up in the 1960s and the 1970s was a very small world. For a long time, I remember I thought people only had the names Franklin, like mine, and Bradford, like my grandmother and my cousins. I didn't know there were other last names. Then I began to figure out there were, because we had in the neighborhood, we had Sheffields and Gateses and Wigginses in our neighborhood. So I realized there are other names. I thought for a long time that the only religion was Baptist, because everybody in Dickinson was a Baptist. There were two churches. My hamlet of Dickinson, Alabama, had a population of 300. Are we back? Are we back? Mm-hmm. Had a population of 300 people, about half white and half black. And there were two churches in Dickinson. One was for the black people, one was for the white people. Churches were not, and still mostly are not, segregated in the American South. So for me, it was a very small world. I've got a picture I'm going to try to show you. I'm not sure if you can see it or not. Can you see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's me and my cousins on a railroad trestle. That's where we fished. Mm-hmm. It's a place called the Blowout. And that's how, just a couple of pictures of Dickinson. That's my brother and me walking on the railroad track in probably 1974 or 75. So again, a very different, very small world. We were in a dry county. We did not have a brewer that we knew about. But in Dickinson, I call it a hamlet. That's because it was a store and then the houses around the store. There were no other businesses except the store and the post office. And that railroad track that I just showed you ran right behind the store. And I've always heard that the definition of a town is a place where the train stops. Well, the train did not stop in Dickinson. It just went right through it several times a day. And behind the store there. It was a culture where most of the men hunted. We hunted deer, turkey, squirrels, rabbits, most anything, and we ate whatever we would kill. A very religious community. Everyone went to church. There might have been a couple of old drunk guys who did not go to church. Because we were a dry county, there were wet counties around. A dry county meant that no alcohol sales were permitted. But a wet county was next door. So people just went across the county line to buy beer and then brought it back into Dickinson. But sometimes people ask me if Crooked Letter is an autobiographical novel, and it very much is. But they're in a dry county in Crooked Letter as I was. And Carl Ott, who's Larry Ott's father in the novel, drinks all the time. He drinks a lot. Which was unlike my father. My father, who was a mechanic, fixed cars, never drank. It was, I went to the public school, and there were, there were more Black people than white people, excuse me, in my public school. I did not have many friends in school. I had more friends at home, but not at school. so that's kind of, just I guess a thumbnail about what it was like to grow up in Alabama in the 1970s. We lived in this hamlet. About 2 miles away was a lumber mill, and the main industry at the time was cutting down timber and making paper. So there was a lot, the lumber mill in Fulton, which is 2 miles away. About 5 or 6 miles away was Grove Hill, where my father had his automotive repair shop. But there were woods everywhere. There were, we were in a very wild place. I could walk 2 minutes in any direction and be in the deep woods. We had guns. Everyone had guns. We had dogs who lived on our property. Just a pack of 5 or 6 dogs that were always around. So it's a very different way of living than I live now. So I'll let that go for that question and see if there's another question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, everybody realized that quite a lot of this background can be found in the novel as well, at least parts of it processed and developed and changed a little bit. But there's a lot that seems to be autobiographical from the background. Let's go on to the characters perhaps now and a little bit more into the novel. And people are interested in how you relate, for example, which of the characters resonates most with you? Do you relate more to Larry or more to Silas? That was one of the questions.
That's a very good question. I relate to both characters. As a writer, every character, has part of me in him, her. But excuse me. But with Laureate, the similarities are kind of almost alarming. There's so many of them. I wrote much of this novel in the country of Brazil. My wife is a poet, and she got a Fulbright grant to Brazil. And so our whole family moved down there. She might be coming with my charger. No, it's not her.
False alarm.
Oh, yes, but she'll be here soon. I can. Behind me is the parking lot. But so Beth Ann, my wife, got a Fulbright to Brazil and took our family down there. That the 2 of us and our 2 children at the time. We now have 3 children, but the 4 of us went down there, and I lived there. We lived there for almost 6 months. And I had nothing to do except write. And for a writer, the greatest gift is the gift of time, because books, especially novels, take a long time to write, to conceive, to compose, to edit. It's just a long process, especially for me. I'm a slow writer. But down there in Brazil, I had almost 6 months with nothing to do but write. And so every day I went and tried to work. It took me a while to get going. But when I finally got the book, to going, oh, here she is. Hi. Hi. Thanks so much. Excuse me, one sec.
Tom's wife is a poet, as he said, and she writes beautiful poetry. I met her when they were in Tübingen a few years ago, for one of these readings, and she gave a reading of a poetry that was grand. So, sorry that we couldn't see her now. Okay, now we'll be on the safe side soon.
My chords aren't very long.
Okay. It's too difficult to follow the chat. Give up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure everything can fit. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
It's okay.
What a mess. Okay. Okay.
You were talking about Larry and Silas, and we could go on to their friendship. You know, was it a real friendship? Was it ever? How is it going to develop? Were you thinking about what's going on after the novel as well?
Well, I'll just, excuse me, I'll back up and just finish the other answer just quickly to say that when I was in Brazil, I was away from my normal office here and my office at home and the stuff that I usually have around me. And so I was away from home and I began to write more from memory than from like an environmental influence. When I work every day, I try to go outside and look around and see the natural world. And that's, you know, and then I bring that back inside to my computer. I go out and I'll notice a tree or something, and I'll start to write about that. But in Brazil, where the trees are very different and the animals are different, everything's different, I was out of my comfort zone. And so what I began to do, almost accidentally, it's the truth, is to turn inward toward my own memory. And I began to write about myself. And the more I wrote about Laureate, the more I really was writing about Tom Franklin. And when I was nearly done with the book, and I had someone read part of it for me, and this person asked me, wow, this Larry character resembles you a lot. And I realized, oh my gosh, I really have been using a lot of my biography to put into Larry. And it's almost easier to say what is not in common between Larry and me than what is in common. So the two things that main differences is, as I said earlier, Larry does not have, I did not have an alcoholic father like Larry. Larry's father is a drunk and he's mean and he doesn't like Larry. I had a good father who did like me and did not drink. And the other big similarity between, or rather difference, between Larry and me is that he has no cousins and no siblings. While I was very lonely at school and had really no friends at school except one that I'll tell you about, at home I had my brother and I had a lot of cousins, as you saw in those pictures. So I was not nearly as chronically lonely all the time as Larry is. So in that way, he and I are quite different. But Inge, to your question, yes, there was a friend, and this is another way that I'm like Laureate. I had a friend named Wayne Coates who was Black. I was white, I was white, Wayne was Black. And because of this difference, we did not feel comfortable being friends in a complete way. We felt, or at least I did, and he seemed to feel the same way, awkward about our friendship. But we were both nerds. You know, we liked comic books and science fiction books, and we drew. And in those days, it was not cool to be a nerd. It's cool to be a nerd now. You know, now it's fine. There are nerd conventions, anime and comic conventions. And there are YouTube channels about comic books and nerdist stuff. But in those days, being a nerd could literally get you beaten up, could get you attacked. So we had to be careful with our nerdiness and careful with our friendship. And a real good example of that would be during lunch. We ate in a cafeteria at the public school. Terrible, terrible, rubbery plastic food, bad food. But what I noticed is we ate at these long tables, and white boys ate at one table and Black boys ate at another table. And I would sit at the white boy table, Wayne would sit at the Black boy table, but we were not welcome in either of our crowds. The white boys didn't really like me. The Black boys didn't really care for Wayne. So we were lonely. In a way, we were kind of lonely together, but we never once sat together by ourselves at a table privately. And I realize now that was cowardice on my part, much less so than his. And I wish that I had gone and had lunch with Wayne one day or every day, but I didn't. But he's the character that Silas is based on, my friend Wayne. And, you know, it's what's sad about it is that I went to my high school reunion, my 30th high school reunion a few years ago, maybe 25th. And the only reason I went was to see Wayne because I hadn't been able to find him after school. I'd looked for him because the book thanks him in the end But when I got to the reunion, the first thing I found out was that he had died a couple of years after high school. So he's gone now, and that's very sad to me.
So that is the story of your private life. But what about, the friendship between Larry and Silas in the book? Did you plan it to be a real friendship? Is it real? Is it something that can last, that can be renewed at the end of the book? How do you personally see this? How did you want it to come across?
I wanted it to come across as realistic, first of all. I wanted them and it to be believable. I think that, excuse me, I think that their friendship in the book is not a real friendship. I think in the book, Larry is so desperate for a friend that he would be friends with anybody. And I think that Silas is in a way using Larry, uses him for the gun and for other things. Not that perhaps he means to, but I think that on some level he senses Larry's desperation. And so he knows he will be able to take the gun from Larry, the rifle from Larry. So I think that their friendship in the novel is not a real friendship. It's Larry's loneliness and it's Silas's, it's Larry's loneliness and desperation and Silas's desperation and need for corporeal things, his need for, their need for a place to live, and the car and all that. And Larry kind of helps with that. So, but the question about them as men is also there. And of course, Larry tried to reach out to Silas and Silas ignored Larry. So, that caused problems in the present for both of them. But, here's the question for me: what happens after the novel? The novel ends with a kind of reconciliation. It's not a complete reconciliation, but I hope that there's hope that they will be able to start to mend this broken brotherhood that they have. They are half brothers, and I hope that because they're what each other has, I hope that after the novel ends, they will somehow be able to put it back together and become friends because they need each other. And honestly, because I wrote the novel, I can say I know more about it than anyone else. I can say that, yeah, after it ends, they do wind up being friends in the future.
Good. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions now mixed together. First of all, there's the question how to pronounce Shabbat. Did I pronounce it correctly now?
No, it's called Chabot.
Chabot. That was one of Chabot. Okay, so Chabot. The question now that comes, it has to do with Chabot and staying there. Larry tried so many things to establish, a sense of belonging in Chabot, but he failed. Has this got to do with people's opinion of him? Of course. Is there anything he could have done to change his situation? And the other question refers to his parents. Same thing. Why didn't they leave Chabot County after, their reputation had been totally ruined? Anything would have been better than staying there, one of the students said. Anything would have been better than staying there. Is this true, Wilbur?
That's true. An easier question to answer is why did Larry not leave when when the parents were both, when his father was dead and his mother was in the nursing home? Why does Larry stay? I'll get to that in a moment, but the question of why do the parents stay is, I think it's simply, for both of them, a matter of habit. They've been there for so long. This is where they both grew up. It's where their friends are. It's where Carl Ott's business is. And so even when the events happen with Larry, certainly it would have been, terrible and embarrassing for his parents. But I think that people still would not have cut his parents completely off. I think, that one of the sadnesses of Larry's life is that if he had felt that his father believed he was innocent, he himself might have had a higher opinion of himself. But in his heart, Larry thinks his father thinks Larry is guilty. So I think that, excuse me, I think that they're just sort of all mired, in this sadness. But Carl can escape it every day and go to his shop. And Larry's mother does love Larry, and I think that she believes Larry, excuse me, and believes in Larry. So I think that Larry had his mother, she had him, and I think Carl had his shop, which kind of explains why they didn't leave. It would have been hard to uproot and move far enough away and start a whole new business. And at this point, I think that there may have also been a level of giving up in both Carl and Inge. I think that, that what happened was so terrible that in a way their lives just became a rote of similar behavior, just getting up and living and going and doing every day, But when Carl Ott has died, and when Inge Ott is in the nursing home and and is losing her memories one at a time to Alzheimer's, I wonder why Larry didn't leave. I asked myself that. Why didn't he leave? At least move to another county so that they may not know who he was for a while. He could still have come back and visited his mother, so his mother would be one reason not to move. But another reason, that he wouldn't move, I think I can answer in an analogy. In India, elephants are used for labor. Elephants provide great strength. So they help with farming, and they can drag, they can pull wagons and things. So, and a baby elephant is trained to serve its whole life. And a baby elephant has around one of its legs an iron clasp, and it's attached to a chain, and that chain is attached to a post that is pounded with a hammer into the ground. A baby elephant is not strong enough to pull that post out, but he tries, or the baby elephant tries to pull it out and can't. But as the elephant grows and gets bigger and stronger, it would, as an adult, be able to pull that post out with all of its strength, but it's been trained to think that it can't. All its life, as a younger elephant, it wasn't able to. Now it won't even try. So I think that Larry's grown up in this one place. It's all he knows. And he doesn't ever quite consider that he could leave. Mm-hmm. It doesn't cross his mind to go. It just isn't in his makeup. Mm-hmm. He just assumes this is his life. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about wherever we grow up, Inge, you said in a small town in Bavaria, wherever we grow up, that is our reality until we learn otherwise, until we learn that people have different names from Franklin and Bradford, and they're not just Baptist or Methodist. There are lots and lots of different kinds of religion, and the world is a big and varied place. But we have to learn this. And Larry, unfortunately, was never able to get out and see that world and learn that. He did. So Larry, it would never have occurred to him to leave.
It's sad how we're, dragged down by our habits.
Yeah. And, and humans can sadly get used to anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
What Larry did then later on with Wallace, he established a sort of friendship with Wallace. There was a question from the people listening in on this talk. Larry seemed to have been a sort of mentor to Wallace, and doesn't Wallace seem very close to or resemble Carl Ott? Do you see that parallel as well? That was mentioned somehow. I can't find the question now. It's too fast for me.
I have not really, in my own mind, connected Wallace Stringfellow and Carl Ott that much. Mm-hmm. I think with Wallace, he's obviously a very, sorry. I've got a very tenuous system here. Everything, it's lots of wires and things. So if I touch one thing, everything falls.
So you said intentional, that parallel that somebody here saw between Karl Ott and Wally Stringfellow.
Yeah, I honestly, I had not thought of them together. I think that Wallace does not have a father figure in his life. Larry at least had Carl. Carl is somewhat, at least he is a father figure. He fills the space a father would fill. He works and provides for his family and gives Larry, a kind of stability. But Wallace didn't have that. Wallace has a single mother who works at least 2 jobs and goes out at night to blow off steam and drinks and comes home with lots of different men. So Wallace has not had a good example of a father for him, or a good example of a mother. And so Wallace does see Larry as a kind of mentor in a sick way. And Larry becomes a kind of father figure for Wallace in a kind of sick way, because Wallace has no one else. Larry doesn't really have Carl as a father, but he has him at least as a father figure. And so Wallace is also seeking that father figure, and I think finds it in Larry. Because he's always been interested in Larry. He remembered Larry from when he was younger. And so they have a kind of history. And in Wallace's imagination, he and Larry are, kind of connected, because Wallace has these dark, troubling thoughts that he assumes Larry must have had as well. So he feels this kinship, this connection with Larry for the crimes Larry might have committed. And Wallace finds those crimes kind of exciting in a very perverse way.
Let's go on to another crime. That's something our readers are also puzzled with. Cindy Walker, what happened to her? People always want to know.
Well, that's one of my favorite questions. Just and to say too about the crimes, the first, I remember when I was writing this book, this was down in Brazil. It was in maybe my last month in Brazil, and the book was further along than it had ever been. It felt like for the first time I could see it, I could see that I could finish it. It was maybe 80% complete at the time. And one day it occurred to me, oh my God, I don't know who killed Tina Rutherford. I didn't know who the main villain was. Tina Rutherford's murder starts the whole book. And I didn't know who had done that. And I thought, wait a minute, as the writer, I need to know. And somebody had to have done this, or otherwise, it wouldn't have happened and there would be no book. So I began to panic. And I started trying to think of who it might have been. I thought first that it was Larry. Maybe Larry had actually killed Tina Rutherford. Maybe Larry was a split personality, the way, and he just didn't realize he had done it. And so he could even talk to himself as different people. And, but this felt wrong. It had also been done a lot. Robert Bloch's novel Psycho and Hitchcock's film of Psycho after that. It's, about the split personality, where the character in that, plays both himself and his mother. His mother, is a split one of his, another aspect of his personality. The same thing happened in Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk and the movie. There are, it's a split personality. So that's been done. I didn't want to do that with Larry. I didn't want Larry to be mentally challenged in that way, insane like that. Then I thought, well, maybe Silas is the killer. Maybe Silas did it. Silas, in fact, is the one who sent someone to check on Larry to see if Larry was hurt. Silas is the one who discovered Tina Rutherford's body. He's been there at both major crimes. He also discovered Eminem's body. So maybe it's actually Silas doing this. But that didn't feel right either, and I couldn't make that work. So I tried having the mill foreman be the killer, but that didn't work. And one day I was just sitting at my computer in this panic, and I remembered an old story I'd written. And the story was about a kid who was lonely and had no father, and heard about a neighbor far away through the woods who might have killed someone years ago. And this kid goes and becomes obsessed with that neighbor. And I realized, oh my God, my subconscious knew about this Crooked Letter story 10 years ago and prepared this material for me. So suddenly I realized this kid is Wallace. The man he's going to see is Larry. And I sat down that very day and wrote about 20 pages. And I think it's one of the late chapters in the book. It's the chapter where Larry and Wallace have a number of conversations together. And there'll be a white space and they'll be talking some more. And it's just showing them over time, getting to know each other, various visits from Wallace to Larry. In one of the visits, for example, Wallace tells Larry all the dogs he's had who have been killed and lists all their names. Parenthetically, those were all my dogs. That's how my dogs were killed. I mentioned that pack of dogs earlier. But so suddenly I knew who had killed Tina Rutherford. It was Wallace Stringfellow. But that doesn't answer the question, which is what happened to Cindy Walker. That's what everyone asks me. And I'll tell you the truth. I left that ambiguous on purpose because I want this novel to be realistic and to be as close to real life as I can make it. And real life doesn't give us all the answers. We may want to know what happened to somebody, but in real life, we may never find out. And so we do get the murder of Tina Rutherford solved. But in this novel, no, we do not find out what happened to Cindy Walker. There's a strong suggestion that her stepfather, Cecil, killed her. That when she came home from her date with Silas, Cecil knew about it or found out or questioned her, or maybe she just told him. She was pretty brash. She's a bold, very smart woman, young woman. And maybe she just said, you know what? I was dating a black boy. How about that? And Cecil would have been very drunk. And it's possible that he strangled her. I don't know. It's possible he strangled her and buried her. That could be a possibility. And I think that that's in the novel. You might think that from reading it. But I, as the person who wrote the novel, here's what I know really happened. What really happened is that Cindy Walker just walked away, hitchhiked, got picked up by a nice family. They took her to Mobile. They gave her some money. Somehow she got herself on a plane down to Brazil. And down there, she went to a town called Belo Horizonte. And in that town, got a job in an art museum and discovered she was a pretty good artist. And then she fell in love with the woman who owned the gallery. And they became a couple. And right now, Cindy Walker is living in Belo Horizonte, very happy, very, very happy, and also quite wealthy and a really good visual artist. Maybe you've seen some of her work.
Thanks for this insight, and also the insight into your writing process. There were lots of questions about this, and perhaps one of the questions we could tackle now is the structure of your novel is quite complex because you go back and forth between the past and the present. Why did you do this? And wasn't it terribly hard to actually do this? To write it like that?
It was not hard. It took me a while to figure out that structure. It took me a while I knew that the novel had a lot that happened in the past. Most Southern novels do. In the South, we are obsessed with the past. We are connected to the past in the American South. we're connected to the past in ways that we don't always like, and perhaps, are not comfortable with. And I think it goes back to our having lost our Civil War. Let's say if I get in a fight with somebody and I win that fight, I'm okay. I won, I moved past it. But the loser of the fight can brood about the fight. And this is not my original idea. This is from the historian and novelist Shelby Foote, who said he thinks the South is brooding from having lost the Civil War. It's America's great sin, slavery. We're brooding about our sin. And right now we see in our country that a lot of people are still very unhappy. We see that racism has not, I think Germany owned its racism, or tried to, and America has not done that. We still have not owned it, and we see it right now rearing its head. So, I think that any Southern novel has, a strong bond with the past. And as I began writing this novel, I wondered how to get those past moments into the book. Mm-hmm. And it kind of occurred to me that a good structure for it would be to have a Silas chapter and then a Larry's chapter and then go back and forth. But in Larry's first chapter, he's injured, he's shot. And so he's not available to be a point of view. If I was, with Larry, it would just be Larry was lying in his hospital bed. The machines went beep, beep. A nurse came in, nothing would be happening. Mm-hmm. So it occurred to me that when we have Silas, and then I guess we start with we have Larry and then Silas, and then back to Larry's chapter, it suddenly seemed a perfect time to start telling the past because Larry was unconscious. So I think I wanted the effect to be that he's either unconsciously remembering this or perhaps dreaming about it. And in that way, we still get our alternating chapters, and we get information from Larry, but we get the past from him and the present from Silas. So it just worked out to be a very good way to work in backstory. Backstory is just a term that means it's everything the reader needs to know to understand the present action, the current problem, of Silas trying to find who killed Tina Rutherford. To understand that, you need to know about his and Larry's background together, their past. So it just became a way of filtering in the past. And I think there are 3 chapters that are in the past, and those chapters are all from Larry's point of view. And as you'll notice, those past chapters start, they start when Larry's a boy, and they work their way up to when Larry is a grown man. And so when Larry finally wakes up, his past has caught up with him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When you answered this question, you were talking about the legacy of the South with slavery and the repercussions of this. And racism, of course, is still prevalent nowadays. So do you think that your novel can help address important central aspects of racism and how to deal with it, especially today where Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement is becoming stronger?
I sure hope so. The writer of Game of Thrones, which is a giant fantasy series and an HBO show on TV, his name is George R.R. Martin. Martin said this, and I love this quote. He said that a person who reads lives 1,000 lives. The person who does not read lives one life. What I think reading literature, especially novels and short stories, can do is take you, the reader, and put you in someone else's skin. You're walking in someone else's shoes for a while. And just seeing the world from a different perspective for the space of a novel or for the space of a television show or a movie can, I think, really change someone's mind about how they view other people. Because if you're in the mind of someone like Larry for a while, and you see that Larry is actually, a decent person, but people think he did something, maybe you as a reader know someone like that, know someone who's been made a pariah. They're ostracized. Maybe, there's more to their story than you knew. And similarly, with other races. If I spent a couple of years ago, I read no straight white males. I read everything else. I read books by African-American writers and African writers. I read books by gay people. I read books by African-American women and white, just anybody who wasn't like me, to try to expand my own worldview. And, it was a really good year. Often we read books from people who are like us, and that's fine. But we learn so much more about other kinds of culture by reading books about different people and from different people. I hope that a reader will see that there may be a bit more to some story than they know. So I think that's what, because racism right now seems to be, rearing its head again. Trump has enabled all these groups who operate on hate to just exercise and demonstrate. And it's so awful. Right out of my, just past the wall out in the courtyard here at the campus of the University of Mississippi is a statue of James Meredith. He was the man in, I think, 1962, the first Black man to come to the campus here. He had to have a police escort. People were threatening his life. And now he has a statue out there of James Meredith. And what's really sad to me is 4 or 5 years ago, one morning, there was a noose hanging around that statue's neck. It was just three fraternity boys from Georgia who thought that would be funny. And they, but they got him on camera and they kicked him off campus and tried him for hate crimes, as they should have. So it's still so prevalent here in my country and yours and worldwide that I think that if we can read about other people, we might try to, crack some of these barriers that just keep growing. We have a plant here in my country called kudzu. It's actually imported from Asia, and it's a weed. It's a noxious weed. It just grows all over the place. And I think that racism is like that. If left to flourish, it flourishes, and it has to be taught. It has to be taught. We're taught this. We are taught to dislike people for being other than us. And, I guess one of my hopes for my country, my own brother, will use words that I would never use. And, but his children, will not. Well, he might once in a while. He often does it just to anger me, just to get under my skin, to mess with me. But, I think I think we're evolving past that. That his children do not say those things the way he might. So I hope that we're getting past this. But I know that reading is one way, if not the best way, to get past this.
But there are many steps to take, probably for all of us, for every one of us, of course. The other thing that puzzles us as Europeans, apart from racism, which has a different face in Europe, I'm not saying there's no racism here, but it looks differently. The other thing is the use of guns. So do you personally believe that there should be stricter gun control?
Yes, I do.
And
I had,
but you use guns in the book, and they are sort of part of this feeling of belonging. If you have a gun, you belong. You're a man.
It's true. It's true. In that culture, a father gives his son guns, shows him how to use them, trains the son, and my own brother still hunts, has a couple of dozen guns probably, and they hunt almost every weekend. Yeah, I grew up in an extreme gun culture. I had several guns myself. I have one now. I have one shotgun that's a double barrel. It's an antique, and it belongs to my father, my grandfather before him. And I keep it, and I will give it to one of my sons, but only as an heirloom, not as something to shoot or use to kill. I don't mind when people hunt, and eat what they kill. I think that's fine. It doesn't bother me. It's not something I ever want to do. And I don't mind when people have rifles for hunting and shotguns for hunting. But I don't think we need any kind of assault rifles or any kind of large magazine rifles. The great Jimmy Carter, one of our best presidents, wrote an opinion a couple of years ago that I liked. It said, he said, I have three guns. I have a 30-06 for deer hunting, a 12 gauge for turkey hunting, and a 20 gauge for dove hunting. Those are all the guns that I need or anyone needs. And that's true. We don't need these machine guns and these AK-47s or these M16s. Nobody needs those. Those are for war. Those are for killing other humans. We do not need those among the general population. And for some reason in my country, we're so terrified of gun laws. Any new law means they may come take all your guns away. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We have lots and lots and lots of laws related to driving a vehicle. And a car can be as deadly as a gun. We're seeing now people use trucks to kill people, and cars to kill people. I don't know why, there's not a lobby against car laws, but there's not. And I was having dinner about 6 years ago with a friend of mine who's from Canada, and he had a friend of his. They both were from Canada. And this Canadian guy, my friend's friend, said he had 11 guns. I said, whoa. I said, do you have any of those rapid firing ones? I was kind of messing with him. And he said, no. He said, no. He said, in Canada, we have very different gun laws. Our gun laws are very different from here. And as he talked, I realized he was proud of those gun laws. Those gun laws are there for a reason, to keep people safe. He was proud of the gun laws. He wasn't angry about them and reacting to them. And I thought, why can't we be proud of the laws that we have for our guns? Why do we have to, why are we afraid to regulate our guns? And it's simply because the Republican Party in our country wants to keep power. And one way they keep power is by pretending our Second Amendment is under threat, and it's not.
Yeah. Well, gun control is a very difficult topic in the US, and it's not really a central part of the novel. So let's go on to another topic now and still stay with, guns, of course, have to do with masculinity more than I think it's more men who use guns, although lots of women are shown with guns as well in the US. But would you comment on the role of women in the novel?
Yes, I will. One thing, I mentioned now a whole year of reading No Straight White Males. One thing I'm trying to do with my work, my writing work, is to have more strong female characters. Women are a little bit more than half the population in my country, but women do most of the reading in my country. Sorry. Women do most of the reading, and women buy most of the books. So in a way, if I want to keep myself relevant in terms of writing books, I need to have strong women so that women will care enough to buy the books that I write. And so the women in this book, there really are, they're the victims. There are Cindy and Tina. Tina, we don't really know, but Cindy, we get to know a bit because, she talks with Silas. And I find Cindy maybe the most compelling female character in the book because she has anger and she wants to get out. She's not happy with what she has. It seems the other women accept that. Ina accepts her lot with her unhappy husband and her sad son. Alice Jones seems to have no other choice but to accept her lot in life, which is to try to raise her son and keep him alive. And the other major female character is Angie, Silas's girlfriend. And I think that she, is in a supporting role. She's there to help Silas. And so, there's really not a main female character. There are 4 or 5 of them who are in supporting roles. And so I think, I wish that their roles were larger, but unfortunately, this is accurate and true to the South that I grew up in. Men worked and women were home when they could be, unless they had to work as a waitress like Alice Jones does. So, women were relegated to the kitchen a lot of the time. It was a very male dominated, and in some ways still is a male dominated society. And so, and this is a very male story. So unfortunately, with all those facets, the women kind of seem to be pushed back and are entirely in support of the male characters. And, as a male writer, I tend to write more about what I know, which is, being male in the American South. I know that better than anything. I'm a kind of expert on that. But I also, as a writer, need to be an expert on human nature and on people. And of course, people include women and other diverse non-binary people too. So I need to push myself. And a writer who doesn't push oneself is a writer who will become static. And I definitely do not want that, to write the same book again and again and again.
Maybe that next question ties in nicely here. To what extent is mental health a central aspect of the novel? Larry Ott is, Ina Ott definitely is becoming ill, and Wallace Stringfellow is not straightforward either. So these 3 characters were mentioned. Was that intentional that you included 3 characters with mental issues? I
think almost every person in the American South has some form of mental issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it's dementia, maybe it's, it's racism, maybe it's just bitterness. What a lot of the white males in the American South feel is that they're being left behind and that nobody cares about them anymore. A lot of these people, have worked their whole life. And a lot of these people resent anyone who is on welfare. And, they see welfare as being a system exploited by African Americans. So there's bitterness, among a certain class of white people. We used to call them white trash. That's not a good term anymore. White trash simply means the really poor white Southerners who don't own land, are often, alcoholic. These are William Faulkner Snopes characters. They don't have the they're not the aristocracy of the old South. They're not the plantation owners, or the old money. They're sort of the new vulgar money. So there's, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. What is this? Yeah. I think I can just ... and let that be my answer.
Okay. Okay. So you stretched yourself and also tried to see people with mental issues. What was it like to write from a Black character's perspective as a white man? That is also stretching yourself, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Let me, I did forget the first part of that. And I want to answer the mental health question. Mm-hmm. Honestly, it never crossed my mind that, that Wallace has issues and Ina has issues. It really didn't. Just honestly, that that in any population, there are going to be a segment who are just have awful qualities. So I wasn't trying to make some statement about mental health. We're very much more aware of that now, than we ever have been as humans. Right now, one of my kids was just diagnosed with ADHD. I think I had that too. We didn't have a name for it back then, or pills for it. Now we do. I think I probably had that because my kids are just like me genetically. They look like me. They sound like me. They have my aspects. So, I think that's not something I thought of at all in terms of writing the novel. If I wrote it today, it definitely would be something that would be much more in my mind because it is much more in the in the zeitgeist. It's much everyone is talking about that now. But so the other part that you ask about writing from a Black point of view, that's interesting because when I was first starting this novel, before I even went to Brazil, I was trying to write a book. It was not yet called Crooked Letter. It didn't even have a title. I just was trying to write a book about two brothers because my own brother and I are so different. We are so different from one another. He voted for Trump. He's a mechanic. He has a sort of bitterness that a lot of white male Southerners have. He hunts, and guns and all this. And I'm very different from him. But we're still close somehow. We still, spend time together when we can, and we still get along somehow, despite our vast differences. So I was trying to write this book about two brothers. One was a small town cop, and one was a mechanic with no customers. And I was working and not writing this book and failing at it. And a friend of mine stopped by. He's a writer named David Wright Falladae. He's an African-American writer, and he was working on a book and it wasn't working. And my book wasn't working. We were talking about our books. We were complaining. He said to me about my book when I described it, a white small town cop and a white mechanic with no customers who were somehow stepbrothers or half brothers. David said to me, "Why don't you make the cop a Black guy?" And I stopped. That really surprised me. I had not thought of that and would never have thought of doing that. It wouldn't have crossed my mind to appropriate the voice of a Black man like that. Now, you'll notice that when I say appropriate, I did it in a third person way. He, she, it. Not a first person way, which would be I. Telling the story in first person is becoming the person. It's a ventriloquist act. I woke up and tried to get my Zoom together. I am not good with technology. That's first person. Third person is he got into his old Jeep and drove away. That's third person. I felt a lot better about trying to write from a Black perspective in third person than in first. And third person is typically how I write novels anyway. So I thought, okay, with David's permission, I'll try it. And David said to me, so when you get a draft of it, I'll read it for you. And if anything's not correct, I'll tell you. So I said, okay. And so I went off and I started trying to write from a Black man's point of view. And it was not easy. I didn't know how it felt to be Black in Alabama or Mississippi, in the South. But I started looking and noticing things and reading books. And I remembered a conversation that David and I had a couple of years before that. He and his wife had a housekeeper, and she was white. And David and his again, African-American wife suggested that we use their housekeeper. And we said, okay. So we had an interview with this housekeeper and we hired her and she came to clean our house. And a couple of weeks later, David asked me, will she do your toilets? And I said, yeah, why? He said, she won't do ours. She told us she didn't do toilets. And I realized that this housekeeper has a different way of approaching a white family versus a Black family. She won't do the clean toilets of a Black family, where she will clean the toilets of a white family. And I realized that David and other African Americans in my country notice this probably every day. Every day they're reminded that they are Black and that they can be treated like second-class citizens. I could go my whole life as a white man and never once think about race relations, whereas David thinks of it every day. It's such a big part of his life. And so that's how I think got closer to being able to write Silas, thinking a bit of him in that way, of race being a part of his life that I'd never even tried to imagine. And ultimately, I just tried to write Silas Jones as a man. And when I did finish the first draft of the book, I sent it to David, and he wrote me back, or he actually called me and said, okay, let's talk. We spent a very uncomfortable hour on the phone where he was telling me where I shouldn't say. He said, don't use the N-word here. But he said it. He said, don't say here. He said, she would probably think colored. He told me every time I got it wrong, and they were all very nuanced, very subtle instances where I made a mistake. But, he's a good friend, and he knows my heart. He knows that I'm not a racist, and he knew that I'm just trying to write the best book that I can, and he helped me. And so, if Silas works as a character, it's because David helped me, and David's thanked in the back of the book. Mm-hmm. And he and I spoke on the phone just last week. We're still very, very close. Mm-hmm. And he has a new novel coming out about a Black Civil War troop and about the first troop of lifesavers. Those are all Black troop of this life-saving force that became our Coast Guard. So he's writing a novel. He's written a novel about that. It's coming out next year, I think, or later this year. So a long answer.
Now that you mentioned the N-word, there was a question here on the chat. Could you elaborate on Silas's reaction after Larry used the N-word? And why did Silas not reach out to Larry again after sometime after the incident?
I think that Silas had probably heard the N-word a few times in his life. He wasn't totally surprised to hear it from Larry then. I think that moment with Carl making them fight is probably the worst moment in Larry's life. I think that Larry reached for any kind of defense, and that's what was there. That word, like a dagger, will always be there between them. And I think that in a lot of ways, perhaps is in Silas's mind and will always be in his mind, that Larry said it not once, but over and over and over again, I think, or at least in his mind he did. And I think that did have an impact on Silas. And I think when Silas left, he was angry at Larry. Larry at least has a father. There's a moment when Silas cuts Larry's grass. He wants to see how it feels to push the lawnmower. And Carl Ott's returning, and Silas has to run and hide in the woods. And he hears Carl Ott say, "Good job, boy," talking about the grass having been cut. And Silas knows at that moment he will never hear a father say to him, "Good job." And so he's angry about that. He's also, I think, at that moment realizing that Carl Ott probably is his father. I think he's angry about that too. And so I think that he's got a lot of anger about Larry and Carl. And so I understand and I can forgive Silas for not speaking up sooner because of the long, hard injury that he, psychic injury that he has sustained. I probably should have this be the last question. That's okay. Simply, I've got to leave. I've got to be at, I have a class upstairs waiting for me.
Okay.
My class today goes from 8 to 9:15, and I'm just going to start half an hour later today. We agreed on that. So maybe I'll just say thank you, and will that be okay?
Well, yes, if you have to teach a class now. Is that great?
Do you want to do, I think we have five, we'll do one more question. I think we have 5 minutes.
Okay. One more question is okay. Okay, so maybe, is there anything in the novel you would change if you had to write it again?
Yes. You wonderful German audiences have found about 6 mistakes in the novel. They're very small things, but I got an email a couple of weeks ago from a German student who found a difference between Larry and Silas's age. At one point, Larry's older. Another point, Silas is older, and that's simply a matter of it's simply a mistake. When people write novels, they're big. This was over 300 pages, and it won't fit in my head all at once. You can fit a short story in your head, or even a long story in your head, but not a novel. And if you change something in a novel on page, 14, it ripples all the way to page 290. So a change occurs not in one spot, but all through the novel. So you have to be really careful to keep your facts straight. And we have, I read the novel many times before I sent it away to be published. My wife read it. 2 friends read it. David Wright read it. My editor read it. My publicist read it. My agent read it. His sub-agent read it. A co-agent read it. A copy editor read it. And nobody caught the mistakes that German students and teachers caught. Nobody caught those mistakes. So I think with my next book, I'm going to send it to y'all and have you read it for me. And that will be how I get it edited. So I would try to fix all those mistakes if I could. I may actually, what I might do is I might have Larry have the thought in the hospital that he wishes Carl had believed in him. If Carl had believed in him, he might have believed in himself a little bit. I think those 2 things. I would probably, a lot of people complain to me that the first half of the book is way more wordy than the second half of the book. That landscape is given too much attention. But I would say about that I want landscape to be almost as realistic and believable as another character. I love land and landscape, the vegetation, the flora, the fauna, the animals. I love all of that. It's part of any Southerner's life, because the woods, animals are all around you all the time. So, I wanted landscape to be as believable and real as possible, but a lot of people complained that there was too much of that. So maybe I would take a little bit of it out. Maybe I would prune a little of my landscape in the first couple of Larry chapters.
But leave the kudzu inside that is overgrowing the place.
Yeah. Just kudzu. I have to leave the kudzu.
Thank you very much, Tom. This was a very interesting talk, and you answered so many questions and gave us such a good insight into your, way of writing, and also the background of the book and so on. How much of it is biographical. And I'm very pleased with our talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you teaching it. And I want to say to the students who are there, I'm sorry. I know they're making you read this book, and I am sorry you have to read it, but I'm also very glad you're reading it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sophia, too. And I'm sorry again for all the technical problems.
Yes, no worries. There were also some problems on my side, so don't you worry. And thank you both so very much for this interesting conversation. And also thanks to the students and teachers for the numerous questions. I hope you also enjoyed the last 90 minutes and can benefit from it. However, if you've missed part of today's event or still have some questions, feel free to join our second event on Thursday, the day after tomorrow at 4 p.m. Moreover, we will post this live stream on YouTube so that you can re-watch it. Tell your friends or students who couldn't make it today so that they get a chance to prepare for the Abitur in the best possible way as well. And if you like what we do and want to know more, you can follow us on social media and or subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you all for watching. I wish you all the best for your exams. And Tom, Inge, see you on Thursday. Thanks.